guys, today I want to talk with you about Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. This horror novel was first published in 1967, and by 1968 it was already turned into a movie adaptation. As per usual, we will start this review with a short synopsis, then continue to a non-spoiler review, and finish this video with the spoilers. If you haven't read this book yet, then do not worry, I will make sure to let you know when the spoilers begin. The general story of the novel is quite straightforward. We follow a newlywed couple, Rosemary and Guy Woodhouse. Rosemary is a happy, assertive, and supportive young woman who dreams about building a life with Guy and having children. Guy is a perfectly charming gentleman who is also a struggling actor who didn't get his big break yet. They move into their new apartment in a building called Bramford because Rosemary falls in love with it so much that they even pass the opportunity of getting a larger, more modern apartment instead. Bramford is a historic Gothic revival style beauty with a long and rich history. A history that shows a pattern of violence. Once they move into the building, they're quickly met by neighbors, an eccentric old couple, Minnie and Roman Castevet. And while Rosemary finds the neighbors to be intrusive and somewhat unpleasant, her husband starts spending more and more time with them. Since Rosemary's Baby is only about 200 pages long, it is quite difficult to talk about the novel without stepping into spoilers. Therefore, this time I will keep my spoiler-free review quite short. Ira Levin's writing style is wonderful, it feels effortless and is easily understandable. Everything he writes is straight to the point. He doesn't linger over unnecessary descriptions or dialogues in order to prolong the novel. Everything he puts in this book has its purpose. I enjoyed immensely reading this book. There is a reason why Rosemary's Baby is considered to be a horror classic. The story itself is timeless. Take away the occasional casual racism, sexism, and homophobia, which in my opinion was handled pretty well considering that the book was written in 1967. And you could easily imagine that these things described in the book are happening in the 21st century. The horror in this book doesn't come from the supernatural forces. Though there is an obvious mention of it, what really makes it scary is the constant paranoia we share with our protagonist and the growing tension that doesn't leave you since the first time you notice that something is not quite right here. All in all, if you haven't read the book, then do it. I could not recommend it enough. And if you are familiar with the story already, still read it. I promise this book's value does not depend on the shocking ending. It's the journey there that matters. Rosemary's story is just as relevant today as it was 54 years ago. And on that note, we will proceed to the spoilers. When I started reading this novel, I was already familiar with the main conflict of the story. And therefore, while reading, I kept on thinking about how I would have perceived this book if I wouldn't be aware that Rosemary is carrying Devil's Baby. Would I suspect that her husband is involved in this whole conspiracy, or would I think that Rosemary is being delusional? I'm aware that this book includes supernatural beings, witchcraft, devil-worshipping cult, and Devil himself, but there is no doubt that the main villain of the story is Rosemary's husband. And that is hands down the scariest thing about this book. Even if we look away from the fact that he does sell his wife to a cult for a career opportunity the very first chance he gets, and we concentrate on the more realistic issues, he's still the worst. He treats Rosemary as his property. When she gets raped by the devil, Guy wakes her up, rushing her to cook him breakfast before he needs to leave to meet someone. And when she notices the scratch marks on her body, he laughs it off, explaining to her that it was him who was a little bit too rough with her while having sex with her last night, when she was passed out drunk. He even adds that he found it quite exhilarating in a necrophilia kind of way. And whether it's 1967 or 2021, you as a reader still end up feeling icky inside when you read about a man laughingly admitting to a marital rape. And while I do agree that on some level marital rape is a less incriminating explanation than "honey, I sold you to a cult so that the devil could impregnate you while we stood around naked chanting," it still doesn't speak greatly about Guy's character. And when he doesn't look at her as someone that he owns, then he dismisses Rosemary as a child. He reprimands her for being ungrateful when she doesn't want to eat a dessert she doesn't find tasty. He gets angry at her for wishing to see another doctor after months of excruciating pain because it would not be fair to her primary doctor. He throws away the book, which was the last thing she got from Hutch, her friend and father figure, before his death, because Guy is the one who knows best what Rosemary needs. On top of that, Guy isolates her. Rosemary is already estranged from her family for marrying a non-Christian man. And yet, instead of being supportive of her and encouraging her to spend time with people who care about her, he constantly prioritizes his personal commitments over their commitments she made with her friends. Besides that, Guy is quite rude towards Hutch, even though he tends to complain about Hutch behind his back. He also gets incredibly agitated and insults her female friends by calling them bitches just because they encourage her to get a second opinion concerning her pregnancy pains. He overall makes it rather clear that any opinion that is contradictory to his is an opinion Rosemary should not concern herself with. Even when we look at him as an individual, Guy is vain and egocentric. He's responsible for the long life pain inflicted on his wife, for the blindness of the competitor, and for the death of Hutch. And yet, the book leads us to believe that in the end he is not punished, but rewarded for his selfish behavior. I think that one of the greatest things about this novel is the duality of how the story can be perceived. When the book was first published, back in 1967, some have even described it as a paranoid fever dream about patriarchy. And yes, the story overall does tell us that patriarchy without accountability is hell on earth. However, when you look at the decisions Rosemary makes in her life, the story instantly doesn't feel as feminist as one might think from the first glance. Rosemary was raised as Christian, and even though she thinks that she distanced herself from religion, she still tends to ultimately behave as a good Christian wife would. When Guy tells her that he had sex with her while she was unconscious, she gets upset for a little while. But soon enough, she starts looking for ways to excuse his behavior and actually starts feeling guilty about being upset. It doesn't really matter how badly her husband treats her. She does find a way to explain his behavior to herself every time, and that is the only way she knows how to protect this domestic ideal that she created in her own mind. Even though her pregnancy is described as literally a nightmare that almost kills her in the process, for the longest time she refuses to admit that maybe there is something wrong with the pregnancy. She refuses to go to see another doctor for fear that he might suggest her to get an abortion. Lastly, when Rosemary gets to know the whole truth that she just gave birth to Devil's baby, for a split moment she finally gets a choice: to try to kill the baby and kill herself, or to stay and be a mother to him. She chooses the latter, because at the end of the day the maternal instincts she possesses are too strong to deny. And by saying all this, I'm not trying to paint Rosemary as an inherently non-feminist heroine. What I want to say is that all of her life she was conditioned to believe that these things are the norm, that it is something she must do. She must listen to her husband, she must be a good wife, she must be a good and protective mother to her child, despite the child being an antichrist himself. Now, I know that some hardcore horror fans will find this book disappointing, as the supernatural presence is barely in it. However, I do think that even if you would cut away the paranormal subplot completely, it would still be a great horror novel. Devil or not, it is still a story about a woman who is raped, gaslighted for months by those closest to her, who is forced into excruciatingly painful pregnancy, who is heavily over-medicated and practically imprisoned, just so that after everything she went through, she would be told that her baby was born dead. But that's just my opinion. What about yours?